Now, as we close, the idea of corporate worship and what happens in the churches, um, there's a lot of people who've had a lot to say about this, and of course it's an important topic to be considered. The thing that I notice a lot with contemporary Christian music, which I don't listen to a lot of it because it just kind of makes me crazy. Um, I notice that it really is very much devoid of substance, and it's frustrating. I kind of, it makes me sad that the stuff that's put out there as Christian music is not only a lot of times incredibly shallow, sometimes it's absolutely not biblical, and that's kind of the problem. Now, it's a step further when it's worship music, quote unquote worship music, and there's a couple of different problems that I have with this. Let me deal with the first one with the first part of this. Let's say that the music is put out by somebody that I might not think is doctrinally compromised, and I don't have to worry about that necessarily. The content is not going to be something that's conveying an untruth. It's not biblically unsound. But there's just maybe not much in the way of any substance to it. It's not useful in the spiritual sense. Sometimes you might find that that's the case because it seems like the worship song's written about the person singing rather than the Lord that they're supposed to be worshiping. So in my years back at Cyprus, a couple of different things that I had said to the worship leaders there just to kind of convey my heart. I don't have the gift of music. I wish I did, but I don't. And so what I would say to them, first of all, you would want to think half of the church doesn't have eyesight and the other half doesn't have hearing. If that was the case, just think what you're doing. If the person couldn't hear, but all they could do is see, what are they seeing represented? Do they see you as the center of attention? Are you drawing attention to yourself? Or is even though they might not be able to hear you, they might hear somebody doing sign language so they would understand what the words are. But if they're watching you, are you the center of attention? Or are your actions more pointing the way to the Lord in that sense? Now, let's say that the other half of the church doesn't have eyesight, so they can't see you on stage. They don't know what kind of they don't know how you're dressed. They don't know if you're really drawing attention to yourself, but they're able to hear and they can discern what's being said, hopefully. Now, I've seen other things, like other kinds of types of music. Sometimes you don't even know what's being said. You can't understand the words. That would be a problem as well. So the content of what's being said and making sure that it's clear to the hearer is very much important as well. So I would tell the people, think of it that way. Don't draw attention to yourself. Just think like half the room can see you, but they can't hear you. What are they seeing represented on stage? Second part, if the other part couldn't see you, but they could hear what you had to say, that's when you start to get to the content. And I would tell them, even if it sounds great and you've heard somebody else do it and it's really catchy, it's got great melody, it's got great vocal stuff, it's got great music and everything else, can you print it on a piece of paper and read it for its content? Is there anything of substance to it? Is it just the same repetitious stuff that doesn't really have much in the way of meaning? It might sound kind of Christian-y, but there's no real depth to it. It's not really reflective of a heart that's being poured out in worship and adoration of their God. It's rather just something much more simplistic and catchy, and it's easy to sing, and it's high energy and whatever else it may be. If it's on a piece of paper and you cannot see the value in it, then there's no reason that you would present it on stage, because what that means is that you've just dressed up what is something of no value, and you've just made it really cool because of the music and the melody and the production of it, but really ultimately what people are singing has no value. That's a problem. Now, when we get to some of the groups, and the big ones that are out now that people are all talking about is Elevation, Stephen Furtick's group. There's Bethel, that's a big deal because of the church up there in Reading, and so that's Jesus Culture, and there was some offshoots of that. There's Hillsong and the groups that came out of that. And once again, there are times that I've seen, especially on the older Hillsong stuff, I can look through all the lyrics and it's completely fine. And there was a time when Hillsong was still different than where I am doctrinally, but they didn't get into weird stuff. And it was before a lot of people found out a lot of the stuff about Hillsong. But more importantly now, there is a real concern that it's the same way if a worship group is singing the worship songs of a group of people who are doctrinally very heavily compromised, it would be the same as me as a pastor quoting people who are also doctrinally or theologically compromised. There's no difference to that. So those of you who know me best, you know I don't quote people very often. It's just not kind of my thing. I don't like to, to me, sometimes people quoting other people makes it seem like they're learned and that they spend a lot of time reading other people's stuff. I don't really care about that. If I'm going to read a direct quote or say something that's direct quote, I'll give it attribution, but for the most part, you don't hear me doing that. And that's just a personal preference kind of a thing. But if I was going to do it, I'm going to also make sure that that person is not compromised. It makes no sense for me to do that, because here's my problem and my concern. My concern is you. If you hear me quote somebody that I say, well, that's a really cool quote, but man, I really don't like all of their other stuff, the last thing you're going to hear out of my mouth is their name. Why? Because if you trust me to any extent, and then you think, well, he quoted that guy, he must be okay, and you start reading that person's stuff, you're going to run across the stuff that I had a problem with. And I won't be there to say I had a problem with it. So that's why I'm always incredibly cautious about trying or ever quoting someone else. I'm very, very careful about that. I quote my pastor, Jack, often. He's gone to be with the Lord. I never saw anything contradictory, and I never had a problem with the stuff that he was teaching where I'd say, I just cannot support that. It never happened. So I don't have a problem quoting him. I don't have to worry about him contradicting himself down the road. He's gone. He's with the Lord. Well, so it is with music, and it should be the exact same standard there. But it's such a great song. Yeah, but the people that are singing it at your church, if they're hearing, well, that's really cool stuff that's coming out of Elevation, and they want to start looking at what else is happening at Elevation, they're going to run across Stephen Furtick's stuff. I don't want anybody hearing what Stephen Furtick has. That's why I would never, I'm sure if you gave me all of his videos and things like that, if I didn't have to watch him, because he's very big about, the presentation of things, but if I'm just hearing something, I can guarantee you on any one of his sermons, I could probably find a 5 or a 10-second thing that I go, I find no problem with that. And if I quoted it verbatim and said, this is what Stephen Furtick said, well, then what's wrong with the rest of what he says? I don't want to put that out there because I don't want people going and discovering what he's all about. I think he's a dangerous person. So the same thing with the music. Chances are you're going to probably find out that there's a bit of problem with the music itself, but even if it was solid, I don't want them going and checking out the rest of that church. Not on my account, not because of what I did. I don't want to be the one that drives them to that. So picking and being careful about people who are doctrinally and theologically very much compromised, the last thing I want to do is drive people to those ministries, whether it's through their music or through their teachings, through whatever it may be. I just don't want to draw attention to them. I just think that there's too much in the church that leans much more heavily on the deception side. And those of you who know me have heard me say it a number of times. I think that the church, when we think about what the church is a remnant, that when the Lord returns, there's going to be a lot of people surprised. And I said it this way. I've said it this way a number of times, and I'll say it here. I know that it kind of raises eyebrows when I say it. I am a person who believes in the pre-tribulational rapture of the church. And if it was to happen today, and today I'm recording this on a Monday, if the rapture of the church happened today, Monday, I think you would have the majority, a large majority of the church would probably meet this Sunday like nothing happened. And saying that really bothers people, but I have reasons for believing that. And that's that a lot of people identify with it, but they don't necessarily know the Lord on the personal level who has redeemed them. And they're not certainly hearing that from their churches. And so, I don't know who those people are. I don't know what the number is, but I know that there are many, many people who attend a church have no clue who Jesus is. They might know him as a historical figure, but they don't know him on the level that he's the one who has died for my sin, and I know him personally because he is my Lord, he's my Savior. So that idea that if that's not what's being spoken over the pulpit in that way of a direct relationship individual with their creator and the savior of their soul, if they're not hearing that over the pulpit, chances are it's definitely not going to be coming out in the music, because the people that are singing the music probably sit in the church. And if that church is not ministering truth, then they're going to be just as messed up. And remember, one last thing with this, I remember hearing Stephen Furtick once say about, if you're coming here because you want me to spoon feed you Bible studies and then you can just get fat, go find another church, because that's not what we do here. He says, we're about evangelism. Well, great, then go out on the street, man, because the church is for the people who are already saved. And so if you're bringing people into the church to get them saved, then they're really not the church. You're just an entertainment place, assuming that you even preach an accurate gospel. The church is supposed to be for the assembly of the saints, where they are instructed for the work of the ministry, if we agree with what Ephesians has to say in chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. That's where the church is really, it's chapter 4, I'm sorry. But that's where the church gathers together, that they can be instructed and that we would grow together. That's what the early church looked like. The evangelism was happening outside the doors. What happened inside the church is where we're supposed to grow in the apostles' doctrine and learning what it is that we're about. So again, I don't want to have anything to do with churches or music that we know are doctrinally compromised, because the last thing that we want to do is to promote them in any way. Now, people disagree on that. That's fine. They can disagree. But to address it from our perspective, of this ministry, when it comes to me as a pastor and who I would quote and who you would hear me actually in any way, in any kind of way promote, I want to know what they're about. And music is very much the same way, and we should know who it is that we're singing. If we're singing their music, we want to know who they are, because the last thing that we want to do is confuse people and send people who may be confused to a place really they have no business going to. So wanted to address that. And I'm sure I'll probably get lots of comments on that. So if you have any questions on any of what I've shared, please contact me through the ministry's website. That is oldpaththeology.net, and I look forward to hearing from you.